many oil companies. So perhaps this is something that we need to work out together.
I would like to say one thing, and something that we had talked about before. I know you had suggested a article or a report for us to read from Greenpeace. And we actually took a look at that and the demands that Greenpeace has made. There's actually, I think there's 8 of them. And we would be committed. I'll actually give you a copy of these. I'll give you one as well. And we would be committed to maybe choosing a company that will implement these Greenpeace demands so that we can serve the interests of your organization as well as making sure that the environment is taken care of. And if they implement the Greenpeace demands and OECD guidelines, it's likely that they're going to have the concern for the environment and extract the oil in a way that is, is not going to do damage. I do want to clarify, though. I expressed an excitement that you were willing to, you were open to the possibility of extracting the oil. And I hope you know that we are willing to do it in the best way possible. I think the worst case scenario for us would be for another organization to extract the oil and maybe do it in a more harmful way. And it would also harm us because we wouldn't have access to the black gold, as you have coined.
I'm sorry, I think the way that I tried to call it black gold is that it's money that we'd rather not be in contact with, in a sense like it's dirty money. But seeing as that we might have no choice but to do so, that's how we are looking at the problem. So we appreciate it if it's not thrown around so loosely.
I apologize. You say the dirty money.
Yeah, because it pollutes the environment, you see. There's no way around that.
I understand that, and I apologize for, I'm not attempting to throw it around loosely, I guess, and I'll correct that. I know that you have a strong concern for the end of fossil fuel, the use of fossil fuels by 2090. Is there a way that we can serve that interest? Is there a way that we can work towards making that happen?
Yes, well, thank you again. I really feel a lot of positiveness coming from your side, and I feel that they are really trying to meet my interests. I do have some thoughts. I have come in with some thoughts on how the both of us can actually realize my commitment to the elimination of fossil fuels. But before that, I think I would like to know more about what you do intend to do with the oil. You mentioned extraction. What's after that?
Well, we're not a refinery, so we would have to get a company in to do that, and that's why I gave you a copy of the guidelines. Maybe in all the contracts that we do, we could set up the Greenpeace demands that have been set forth in the report.
So it would be extraction, and then you would have a company in for extraction, and then another company in for refining the oil?
I don't believe we would bring that company in. I think we would sell the oil to that company.
Okay, so extraction, and then you would sell the oil.
Yes.
And that would be the end of your concerns?
Correct.
I think one of the worries we had was how the government of Tanzania would be involved in this situation. We know that you have a mining permit for copper, and I'm not sure how this discovery of oil would impact.
As I understand our license right now, it is open to mining the oil as well.
Okay,
So
if
it's
that
a general
helps.
license.
It is a general license for extractions.
Okay, and so there would be no issue with the government, or would you have to strike a deal in terms of...
In legal speak, would there be expropriation of the natural resource, since oil is a very precious commodity to most countries?
As we understand our license to be right now, there should not be.
Okay.
There should not be.
The one thing that we do is we want to give back to the places that we are taking from. There are 2 countries that are in contact with it, Burundi and Tanzania, and we have every interest in making those places better. And we will, but it's important for us to have the money coming in before we have it go out.
Could you tell me more about what your concern is with our license with the government?
I think what we were looking at is how we, if anything, we could help you if you had to talk to the government, because we are professors. We do know a lot of professors, and what we thought we could help with was in any negotiation to help make your position better.
Yeah, for example, if you had needed to get a broader permit perhaps, or in some way, we thought we might be able to help you out on that aspect. But seeing as that isn't an issue according to you, then we're very happy to hear that.
I'm happy to have the help if we do need to go that route, but I think as of right now we should be okay.
So I think if we're looking at just extraction and selling, I think you have mentioned that, and something that I hope we can address at each level is that the companies that are involved are companies that have environmental ethics, that well, if possible, are reputable in that aspect. You gave me these guidelines, and I'm very, very glad to receive them. I hope to be able to work with you in deciding who these companies are who are coming in. And again, this would be a great reassurance to me.
You would like to be a part of the selection process? Is that what I'm hearing?
If that's possible.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And you would agree to having companies that are environmentally concerned?
I think even further than that, we would like those companies to abide by the OECD guidelines or the Greenpeace demands as well in their
great.
contracts.
Yeah.
Well, the next thing that we hear is, I think Marshall mentioned this before we got into the details. You mentioned how whether was there any causes towards eliminating fossil fuels by 2090, which the money from the oil could be used towards. I heard you mention that. So I think Marshall has some things she'd like to say.
We do know that this discovery of oil is a windfall for your company. It was unexpected. What I'm looking at is I do acknowledge that you want to take a large amount of profit from this. And what I hope, and something I thought about when I was coming in, is that you could commit a portion of what you are getting into a fund. And I've thought of names for the fund. It would be something like Short's Investments Elimination of Fossil Fuels Fund 2090. So it could be something that we could jointly set up, and it would start off with that portion of money from the oil being put into the fund, and you could start from there. What do you think?
And we think this is really great for your publicity as well, in terms of your commitment to the environment. So
absolutely. I mean, you said you just thought about it as you're coming in, so maybe it's not an incredibly developed plan, but can you tell me a little bit more? What exactly would the fund do? What would it be responsible for? What would you need for a startup? What can we go from there?
Well, I think the issue of environment we could do with a lot of research.
Okay.
There are a few technologies and a few mechanisms in place. They are being developed as to how we can reduce. Well, one thing is in reducing the amount of fossil fuels being burnt. We can look at alternative renewable resources. Another thing would be maybe capturing the amount of carbon in the air. One of the technologies that I do know about is carbon capture and storage, CSS technologies. And what they do is they capture the carbon in the air and they store it in the ground. So again, what I'm looking at in this fund is for the both of us, for you to put in some money and for us to get a team of researchers into developing technologies, and again with the aim of eliminating fossil fuels by 2090.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable. Do you have an idea of where we'd be at as far? I mean, we're not familiar with setting up the programs and doing that stuff, so I don't know exactly where it would be as far as a cost, or where we'd be as far as. Are you looking for royalty, a percentage, or?
On that issue, I of course I hope for a large amount of contribution. And
well,
personally, or for
as you can see, no,
from investments, and again,
investments.
I mean from the profit that you're making from the oil. I don't want to give you a figure, but what I was hoping for is for you to give me a contribution that you think you could handle. So it could be 20%, 50%, 80%, 100% of what you're making from the oil. Again, because I understand that it was something unexpected, it is really a windfall to the company.
I think the number is something we can explore. I think 100 may be a little too high, but we can definitely take a look into that. I feel a need for reassurance that we are fully committed to making this happen. We are committed to your vision of helping this end by 2090. And we are looking forward to working together. I think that this is a positive step. I mean, it seems like we're really setting the foundation to be able to have a positive relationship, or continue this positive relationship.
Do you think you can give me a range of some sort?
Before we give you a range, I want to ask a clarifying question a little bit. So this would be toward you or toward IATAR, or royalties for both here?
What we thought of was to set up a separate entity
This really is my personal interest and my personal commitment to eliminating fossil fuels. And I'm very happy to have you committed to this as well, which is why I thought of a joint fund, something that we could start together.
So it's a co-ownership on the way that on how the money will be used, and who the researchers will be. You will probably bring the realistic economic side, to the equation, while we will bring the
Our team,
environmental
yeah.
concerns.
The expertise, the research.
Yes.
It would really be a joint effort.
I guess I'm a little hesitant to just throw a number. I mean, this has kind of come at me
range
awfully
fine?
quick.
Just
Somewhere
an
between
idea,
0
just
and
an
100. I apologize. I don't know how this is typically done.
Okay.
And this is something new, and I appreciate your creativity in this. But once again, I want to be realistic.
Okay, I understand.
And I think without having already extracted and knowing what that oil is worth, it's very difficult to start putting figures on the table of how much things are going to be.
Okay. Well, I think sorry, David.
If you want to say something about it, I just wondered if in broader outline, or maybe I should say it differently, in greater detail, could you describe, apart from money, how you see this fund originating, proceeding, who would participate, and over what period of time? That might help the invest people.
Well, this fund, this idea of elimination of fossil fuels is really, it was really a dream. It was a goal, and it's something that I've kept in mind. Again, money was an issue as to how to get it started. And the good people at Investmas, Marshall and Sarah, I think they indicated that they would be willing to play some sort of role in helping me with this dream. So again, it was just something that I thought of, to have some sort of fund, a joint collaboration, where they would provide the startup money. Again, if they would like to contribute in the future, it's a separate issue. But from the oil, from the windfall that they're getting, I was hoping for a percentage of any amount, a percentage of that money to start up the fund. And what I would contribute would be researchers, and we would, I think we would have to settle down as to where this fund, how the money would be channeled into the research.
Did you have an idea?
Yeah, well, as you can see, it's very difficult for Jeanne, to give you a number, since negotiating deals isn't really where an academic's field of expertise lies. But as a good friend, as a lawyer, we see this as, as we've mentioned, it's a good fortune for Investmas, and we're very happy to hear that Investmas is willing to contribute to a good cause. And as with all good causes, there's always a lot of things we can do with the money. So we were hoping perhaps a contribution of 75% of the hundreds of millions of dollars that the oil is worth would go a very long way in helping both companies achieve their target of reducing fossil fuel emissions by 2090. That is something that I, as a lawyer, would be comfortable throwing up with.
And I have to apologize that I don't have a fixed idea. I think Marcus pointed out that perhaps I'm being too idealistic. It's a dream that I have, and I think with the money, if we could get it started, I will definitely come up with a concrete plan, a better idea, something that I can show you on paper of where and how this fund will work.
I think we appreciate hearing the idea and taking into consideration this whole thing, but it isn't something we've really thought about right now. And I think at this time we'd like to really caucus with the mediator and talk about some things that need to be discussed. So if we could.
Can you give us a general idea of what you want to talk about? It may be that while these folks are out of the room, if indeed we do caucus, they can be thinking about it also.
I think that the figure, we want to take a look at the figure, and maybe we can look at specifically where the money is being broken down and talk a little bit about how we can structure something to make a deal work.
Is that something you could possibly begin to explore with the other side without a private caucus? They will understand.
I mean, we threw up that figure as a matter of just to get the discussions going. If you have concerns that you can't settle this today, we can talk about it.
Well, I think it might be a good place we can maybe start on the table, and if we need to, then we can
Once you see what the two of you can talk, you will save maybe a few moments, and you will begin to understand each other better.
And I think in the terms of, making this an open and honest, maybe that is the best way to do it.
I guess we've talked about a lot of different places for the money to go. I have to be honest, the figure 75% is incredibly high from our end. But perhaps it would maybe better to look at the channels in which the money needs to go to. I think the fund is something that the money needs to go to. Maybe the governments of both. I mean, we've talked about the growth of the Tanzania project. That may be something we explore. And also to the Burundi government. We want to figure out how the money can be allocated. And I'm afraid if we took a 75% chunk for you and then gave money back to Tanzania and money back to Burundi, unfortunately that leaves a for-profit business with no profit. And
again, I think what Marcus was doing was try to throw a figure out, and I think he was trying to protect my interests. He was probably worried that we'll end up with like a 5% or 10% sum, and that wouldn't really be helpful in starting a fund. So 75% is not something we are pushing you to. We, as I mentioned, I'm hoping for as much as you can contribute, a big percentage.
Could you tell me more about your reasoning on wanting that large percentage? I guess for us it seems like if we're going to be doing the work and we,
Sure.
it seems unrealistic.
Sure. Now, just to be sure, just to be clear on what you said that you might have to allocate some money to Burundi, some to Tanzania. What was the other one that you mentioned?
the fund?
The fund, this fund.
The fund, yes.
Yes, okay.
Professor Schertz's project.
And you'd like to know where we think the money from the fund is going to, and perhaps some idea of why we would need a certain sum. Is that what you're asking for?
I think so. We just want more clarification on why that large of a percentage when it seems so incredibly high.
I would be happy to address that. I think first of all, again, I have to establish that this oil business is not something I want to get my hands dirty on. And as I said, I want to maximize the benefit that I can get from having you deal with the oil. Marshall pointed out that another company is going to be coming in and they are going to be extracting the oil. And yes, I do prefer to have you working with me in doing this in the best possible way to the environment.
Yeah, you see, there are many things that we need to do to fix the problem we've created with fossil fuels. We need to solve, you need to find alternatives, we need to reduce the emissions, and in between, we need to use cleaner technology on fossil fuels. So there are many things that we need to do to reach this target by 2090, and it is for that reason that we thought that since this was a gift and there wouldn't be any cost expense on your part aside from paying the company to extract it, that 75% out of the remainder would be good, because this is, after all, contributing towards a good cause, and it also promotes your image as a company. And even though you're not comfortable with 75% right now, you also mentioned that we don't know just how valuable the oil really is. We know it's in the hundreds of millions. We don't have the exact figures. Would it be more comfortable for you to see the exact figures before we talk further on the amount?
I mean, I think it's difficult to get an exact figure of what we have there. What may work is if we do a percentage, maybe setting a ceiling and a floor so that we have a min and max that we could do. So we have a range that we're working with. It makes accounting easier. It makes our business run a little more smooth.
So are you prepared to give me a range now?
Well, I guess I'm saying if we talk about that, the way to alleviate the problem of needing the figures would be to set a minimum and a maximum.
I guess, to be fair, reasonable basis, the minimum would definitely be 50-50. I guess that's the most reasonable basis for both parties.
Are we saying that of profits? Of course, is that what we're dealing 50%?
I mean, the whole thing is profits, right? Because no one's. This is not a business.
Well, there's mining.
Right.
There's a cost for mining and storing and.
After paying off the companies to extract it and all,
So yes,
and all that.
profits.
So yes, okay, that's
And
profits.
I think what Marcus also said is a remainder from paying to set up Burundi and Tanzania, as you mentioned. So provide all of that, and then the money that's left over, the money that you would be taking, we would be very happy to have a percentage. Now, I see that you're still very uncomfortable with the idea, and I think I can try to tell you what exactly we're looking at in the fund, And to give you an idea of the kind of work that we need to get fossil fuels eliminated. 2090 seems like it's a long way off, but when we look at the environment, it's not. Now, I mentioned earlier that I want to do more research into alternative renewable resources. But that is something I think you know that has been done. We're looking at solar, wind energy, and a lot of people are doing that. I'm looking also at
Implementation?
yes, at CSS, carbon storage and trapping the carbon. So again, that is something that we're looking at. For the carbon that is being emitted, what can we do about it? So that's the second area of research I'm looking at. Now, the third thing that I didn't mention to you, and it's something I think has a lot of potential, especially in this fund, is implementation. Now, the research that has been going on so far has really been centering around the first two areas. And what I see as is a problem is that we have green technology. You do know we have cars that are fuel efficient, electric cars. What I think is missing is the research on how we can get the infrastructure in place. Now, if I were to use the example on the cars, what I'm looking at is having more electric power recharge kiosks so that people will be more encouraged to use the green technology. That's something that's not happening today. So I'm looking at having real research areas and that the fund will really go into channeling, into helping the research develop, and especially for infrastructure, to get the infrastructure in place so that that people will be ready and they will be pushed, encouraged to accept the green technology.
I think we both very much appreciate the fact that you want to make this a green world, and especially by 2090, and we want to be right on that board with you. I don't know that we can commit to being the only company being on that board with you and funding all of the project. And that's kind of what I'm hearing right now, is that you want us to fund the entire thing, or to put a large portion of just this project in order to fund that. And I think we want to work with you in helping other companies agree to jump in the bandwagon, to join us in this effort. And if we could put in some funds in order to make that happen, we're definitely willing to do that. And I think that's where we need to try and find an agreement here.
So are you saying we should have a team of some sort into just generating more income and more revenue for the fund?
Well, one of our initial goals was to help the spread of the OECD guidelines.
Okay.
And there are different companies that we can help get along in the bandwagon, and with that we can ask for contributions, especially with the people that are helping maybe when we negotiate the refining contracts.
Yes.
And that may be a way to go. I do have one question, I guess. You talk a lot about research and the charging the green kiosks, the charging stations. And when we talk about a large amount of money here, all we know is that there's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of oil. So let's say at the low end you have a $100 million budget. Is that realistic for your endeavor, your vision? Is that money realistic?
Again, it is a dream. And what I'm looking at, not pinning numbers, not pinning figures, is just a contribution. I would like to clarify that I'm not looking at you funding the entire project. What I'm looking at is a start to my dream, to our dream together. A start to the project of eliminating fossil fuels by 2090. A percentage, any percentage, again, as much as you can, would be very welcome to starting this fund. And what I'm looking at in the long term, until 2090 or until we can get it eliminated, is to have continual investment. And I think you raised a very good point that we should have more research areas and more publicity, money channeled into getting more money.
I think I'm hearing a lot of good things from your investors. I think I'm right, not too far off the mark to say that in principle, you have already agreed to the idea that some portion of the money coming from the oil should go towards setting up an organization, a joint effort between both of us to further environmental cause. So, and I also hear from you that you'll be keen to take on board other companies who are just as reputable as yourself, who also respect the OECD guidelines, and you also like to encourage these companies to come on board, not just to fund, but also to help, perhaps implement the ideas that we're going to discover and and you're going to discover and research upon. Am I correct so far?
I believe you are correct so far. We definitely want to try and extend the OECD guidelines as far as we can and make sure that other companies are abiding them as well.
Well, I think definitely we have no objection in principle if you would like to have more companies involved. Having a larger funding base is always good, but perhaps I'd just like to caution that one reason why we thought having this started between just Investmas and Professor Schwartz and his team is that at least control over where the funding is going is easier to rein in, because too many cooks will spoil the broth. And as much as we think other companies are as reputable as yourself, we really don't know, because we haven't had the opportunity to work with them as long as we have you. So I think perhaps this is something that we can consider, having more companies on board in the future. But I hope I'm right to say that at least for now, having the SIEFF 2090 is an idea that you're keen to keep in principle.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. Am I hearing you say that too many people contributing is a bad thing? Now, we've set up guidelines, and we want people to follow or agree with the OECD guidelines as well as the Greenpeace demands that have been set up.
No, I'm not saying that contribution on its own is bad. All I'm saying is that as organizations go, the larger they get, the more complicated it can become. And this being a new relationship, it would be prudent to move cautiously. And having this idea that we are open to having more companies on board is definitely a good thing, and I think we can work towards that. But all I'm saying is that for now, I think it would be in both our interests not to have other parties in from the very get-go, but let us work it out before we consider having other people in.
So it sounds like you really want to start kind of small and grow as time goes on. So how much money do you want to start with? Because it is going to get larger. So why the 75% or that much money right away when we know it's going to grow as we get bigger?
So it's back to the numbers again, and all I can say is that we felt, or at least as her lawyer, I felt that in principle a gift that had come at no expense, and since this is for a charitable cause, a greater proportion of it would be reasonable to expect, since whatever you keep is purely, no, you don't have to contribute anything of your own pocket. In fact, the expenses to extract it will come from the oil revenues. I would think of it as a sign of generosity, perhaps, on Investma's side. And I think that will go down very well with the community that we represent, which is Greenpeace and the other NGOs. So that's where I'm coming from. I hope you can see that I'm not trying to push numbers on you, but we think that in principle, it looks like a good idea.
Could I interrupt, or do you want to respond directly?
Go ahead.
It occurs to me that you're going down a fantastic path here that will be very, very productive, at least potentially very productive. These kinds of arrangements are very complicated. I think from my experience, starting simply, but having a plan in writing is something that may be very, very helpful to you. And out of that work may come an idea of what the numbers ought to be. And you're about an 80-year period you're looking at now. None of us in this room is likely to be around then. And so you have to have a detailed plan, I think, showing the path that you hope will be followed, but you have to leave room for modifications. So could we agree that your next meeting is going to focus also not only on the expert and the NGOs guidelines, but on how this fund might be set up, who would participate, what its objectives would be, what the timeline would be, and then what the costs might be and what is needed. Also, the PR is going to be wonderful, it would seem to me, for all of you. It could be a very, very exciting effort, even though at the moment it seems to be a kernel of a dream, but it could be quite good. Does that make sense?
We think it does, definitely.
Does it make sense? Could you join in that? And
I can. I think the one thing that I would like to do, though, is I think you have put a figure out there, and it would be unfair if we didn't let you know where we were coming from. Would it be okay if we show you a little bit about our vision and where we think? Would that be okay? I know we're short on time, but...
That's all right. We're here. I think the substance is more important, so let's work on it.
Okay. I think that the time timing is important of this. Now, I know that it's 80 years out. However, we can't just sit by and let it happen. We need to be aggressive in the approach with the organization. We also need to be cautious but aggressive in the extraction of the oil to be sure that we are able to get full value for it, so that we can progress, I guess. A figure that we were looking at was a total amount of 25% of the profits being put back into the community. So that would be, well, I guess our breakdown was similar. It was this: 5% would go to Tanzania, 5% would go to Burundi, and 15% would go to the fund that you have set up.
15?
15. And that would give a total of 25%. But what it would do, and another thing that we would like to set up, is show a continued relationship. And that would be 5% of our net profits until 2090, if we're still in existence by then, each year. So the 25% would come specifically from the profits from the oil, and then it would be a 5% contribution to the fund every year.
From our company.
And we think this would help the growth of the organization that you had, or the fund that you had thought. We think it may be an opportunity to encourage other investors, and it may be a way to show that we are trying to better the environment and try and better the situation. How would something like that look for you?
I think if I could just say why we were looking at a large number and something above 50%. Again, it's the oil. And I don't like the idea, frankly, of having it being exploited, being extracted, being used. I'm not comfortable with it. And what I hoped to get from our agreement was that what you get out of the oil, you'd put back into the environment. I'm being realistic here, and Marcus has told me to be realistic and be practical in approaching this. And we've agreed that to ask for 100% as a company is not fair to you.
I mean, it isn't easy, I assure you, for us as members of the Green Party to even think about telling our compatriots that we are actually letting a company extract oil and that his software helped them find that oil. I hear from you that you're committed to this by contributing 5% of your net profits until 2090, and that's, I think, a marvelous commitment on your part. Not many companies would dare to do that, and I think you also mentioned you're not even sure whether you might be around by then. And I think that's the main concern, because that throws up a lot more issues that we cannot decide today, since we don't know what your net profits are. I'm not sure if you'd like to commit that number, considering we also don't know how much the oil reserves are. It might actually be better for you to commit more out of the present value of the oil than the future value of your profits, if the amount of the oil is not as much as we both expected.
So we're not trying to push them on giving us a lot, but I hope that you can understand it is a big concession for us to really say yes to you using the oil.
And I guess aside from the fact that it shows the investment is generous and committed, I think it's also symbolic if at least 50%, if not a greater proportion of the oil reserves do go towards environmental cause. And if you really are concerned about if you really are concerned about keeping some money from the fund, maybe we can consider putting back, some of the money that was not used, back into investments. Although I'm not really sure how that will work out. If that's really your concern, the sum of money that you require from the oil.
I think with only 5 minutes left, I don't think this is a discussion that we really want to start getting into, of course. I think what I've heard is 50%, 50%, 50%, almost getting kind of positional a little bit. And I understand that it's coming from a good place and you feel it's in our best interest as well. And I think that's something we're going to have to discuss and maybe meet another time to actually pin down a number and talk about what's realistic here. And maybe at that time we'll have a better idea of the actual amount so that we can deal in real numbers rather than these hypothetical
I apologize if I came across as positional. I think what I wanted to impress was that we are looking at at something substantial. And again, we don't have time. We will have another meeting, and what I hope is that you will go back, reevaluate the oil that you have, reevaluate what you can get out of it, and hopefully you can be kind to us and give us a large amount.
Could I ask another, 2 questions, as a matter of fact? Is it possible for you to consider, and I don't know the technology, and maybe no one here does, to consider limiting the use to which the oil would be used that is extracted from this particular field, so as to reduce negative impact on the environment? Would this help you in terms of dealing with this dirty oil?
I think I thought about that, and I clarified with them what they wanted to use the oil for. I understand that they're not an oil company, they are
Yes.
a mining company. They are going to sell the oil
But they're going
off.
to sell it.
Yes, and I think what we agreed on, I'm not sure, we agreed that in the extraction of the oil and in the company that you're selling to, we will both agree, and you will have me on this, that the company will be someone that I can agree to. It will be a company that has commendable environmental ethics.
I was thinking of something more specific, that the oil extracted will be for specific uses and not for other uses.
Oh. Yes, I think that would also
I
be
don't
a
know
very
whether
good idea.
technologically that makes any sense or not, but you might consider that.
I
Second,
think I would have to research on that.
okay, yes, the second point was I'm understanding now, or gaining the sense, that the future use of Aquafinder will fall into place if you folks agree as to these other issues we've been discussing. So that important business technical issue seems to be subsumed here and being taken care of. Is that right?
I think a lot of it revolves around what we're going to do with it and how we're going to contribute the money back to, what amount we're going to contribute and how we're going to contribute it. And as soon as we can come to that agreement, which I feel comfortable we can do relatively soon at our next meeting, that I think a lot of our issues will be washed away.
And think, yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. And David, I think on the point of the Aquafinder, yes, it is an issue that I think both of us are concerned about. But perhaps, well, at least our perspective coming in was that the oil was an immediate issue that we had to deal with. And I wanted to make sure that the oil would be used in a way that met my concerns about the environment. So I think I'm hearing good things, that my environmental concerns will be met. We have agreements in principle, and probably in our next meeting, we could flush out these agreements and talk about the Aquafinder, and, well, you lawyers can talk about the legal issues.
Or we can do it separately, away from the clients.
Can I just summarize to make sure we have all of the agreements
Yes.
down? Apparently, we don't have time.
We don't have one more minute? Yes, yes.
Okay.
We got to close this deal.
I know. Apparently, we are going to have an NGO person picked by you
For Tanzania.
for Tanzania to oversee the OECD guidelines. Additionally, when we're trying to sell the oil, you're going to be on our team to make sure that we sell with the guidelines and with the demands of Greenpeace. In addition, we have agreed in principle to form a fund to end the use of fossil fuels by 2090.
Yes.
And you're going to meet again. I suggest you reduce that to writing, share those notes so that you, as you take the ideas back to your respective teams and managements, you're both talking about the same issues.
Yes, we'll
Thank you.
keep communication lines clear.
Great.
I think you should be congratulated on the progress you made. It was remarkable. Thank you.
Good job, you guys.
Thank you for being our mediator. Great job. Great job.
David. Thank you. Sarah, you did a great job.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Hello, I'm Claude Amar. I'm a hotel developer, but that's not the reason why I'm here. I'm also a mediator. Most of you have seen from some of the preliminary rounds. The teams were excellent. What can you expect from the two teams going to the final? So needless to make compliments, you've been beyond expectations, both of you, or the four of you. Ronald and I have decided that the winner is the mediator. that was a much easier choice. A few comments. Both your openings were very good. Shall I call you Mike?
Sure.
Or Marshall?
Mike.
Mike, you laid down a very clear summary of the situation, which promoted the spirit of mediation. And your opening was all about interest and also the value to the relationship and also the profit that you could take from mediation. You immediately said two things important: that it was necessary to improve the sharing and the use of the money, as well as disclose your unhappiness in the development of the relationship. But you immediately jump into let's be practical, which was very strong because you said you were unhappy, but let's try to repair this. And both Mike and Sarah immediately embarked, and I thought that the idea of the agenda right away was very good because it set the tone for the mediation. You have kept repeating your commitment to what you had committed before, and I think it was good, but probably not enough. That's why you had a very long session of checks and balances, but that allowed both teams to gather as much information as they needed. Nevertheless, Jeanne expressed her concern with failed promises and stated strongly that she needed a real assurance. You came with the idea of the farm development at that point, and you're abiding to the OECD guidelines and how much you were committed to them. But when you came to the cost, and that's probably very difficult in this exercise because cost was not part of your information, neither general nor confidential, Professor Schultz came with examples, which was a very good way to set standards, which I'm sure is what you've learned in your negotiation classes back in school, how much standards were important in a negotiation. At that time, the Schultz team also confirmed their interest for the OECD guidelines. But you reminded that trust was important to you, at which point Professor Schultz said that it was an issue of trust. But Mike, you didn't let that pass, and you immediately expressed empathy, saying that you felt she was hurt, which, seen from here, reinstated the confidence. And a few seconds before the mediator summarized everything came the idea of the NGO, which the three of you, including the mediator, put very well forth. I'm sure you will discuss, is the next meeting tomorrow?
Yes. Sure.
You will discuss tomorrow what happens in case of default, because what's the use of that report if we don't know what to do when things go astray? Mike, you continue with the empathy very strongly by talking about Professor Schultz's reputation, which was a very strong point. And you asked them, that was you, Sarah, how can they help you? You've been very lucky, you found oil, but what to do with it and what to do in the right way, which is more or less where, no, that was later, sorry. I'm getting confused with my notes. The same way they came with the Brazilian example, you came with the Greenpeace guidelines. Again, standards. And I thought that that question was very good. How can we meet your 2090 target? That's not the time where we all went for burying. That came a little later. I will not spend too much time on the permit. That was very strong in the case, but you didn't spend too much time on it. But then came the idea of the fund, which was really a good suggestion, and you embarked upon it very well. The royalty was obviously the good idea. I probably would regret that we've spent a little time talking about how much, because none of you could reply that question. but it was worth discussing because you came out with very strong argument and you came out with very good ways out of an impossible discussions on both sides. There was a lot of humor, and that was very good. And then came the idea of the caucus, which ended up in a non-caucus. And that non-caucus was extremely constructive. So for people like me who have been trained to avoid caucus, now I know what to do, a non-caucus. It was important when you said that you would channel funds to the Tanzanian government, to the Burundi, to the fund, but you need profit. Because it seems that Professor Schultz is not aware of real life. Well, I have read all of the information. It's right that Professor Schultz spent a lot of money. Jeanne, you said, look, if you don't do it, if you do not extract the oil, somebody else will. But I prefer you to do it.